Today we're going to be in the book of 1 Samuel. We're going to be starting a new sermon series this week that's going to go on for several weeks. We're going to look at a Bible story that most of us are very familiar with in the story of David versus Goliath. This is a story that has captured so many imaginations and hearts, and there's artists who have tried to create images such as this to show how epic of a story. I mean, I don't know about you, but I love good stories, and I love big epic stories. And there's not really much that's a lot bigger than David versus Goliath, And we always hear now in sporting events, it's David versus Goliath. It's the underdog versus the champion. And everyone's always rooting. Most of the time, everyone is rooting for the underdog. Unless the underdog is the Patriots, then you vote for the other one, right? All the time. But you're always going for the other one. You're always going for the underdog, always going for David. And I began, as I was at the coffee shop this week, I was just asking God, what are we supposed to go over? What are we supposed to be, what's next? There's several different series that I've been working on that are just not quite ready yet. And I'm like, God, what do we need in this church? What do we need? And I believe that God impressed on my heart that people are scared. I believe that people within this room are scared. I believe that I am scared of where our nation is going, of where schools are going. We're afraid of the future that our children will encounter. We're afraid that our religious freedoms are going to be taken away. And some of us have even more basic fears that we're going to lose our family. That I'm not going to beat this addiction, that I truly can't be the man or woman that God has called me to be. And as I began thinking that, I realized we need to take some time and look at the story of David versus Goliath. And we're going to look at it in a couple of different ways. So we're going to be in the book of 1 Samuel 17, starting at verse 1. We're going to read through verse 11 for now, and then we'll stop, talk a little bit, and then keep going, okay? Now the Philistines, by the way, were this neighboring country to Israel who had been fighting against Israel for generations, okay? When we get to the story, just let me give you a little bit of a background before we get into it, because it's important. In this story, we come across several different characters. We come across the Philistines, who were this pagan group that were known for idol worship. They would sacrifice their own babies on altars. They were a brutal people, a warring people, and they were neighbors to Israel. And Israel constantly had these fights against the Philistines. So when Israel and the Philistines come up and fight each other, it's really not anything new. It's not like why are we fighting these guys? It's it's them again. All right, let's go. It's the blood feud that has been behind them. And we see that, and we're going to see a little bit of it. But this story takes shape in a little bit different way. Currently, in the nation of Israel, you've got Saul as the king, very first king of the nation of Israel. Just a couple of chapters before, if you go through and read, and I encourage you, read the book of 1 Samuel. It was one of my favorite books in the Bible to read through. And Saul has become king and had a rebellious heart against God, would not obey God, and because of it, God withdrew His blessing, withdrew His Spirit from Saul. Saul has fought the Philistines before, but we're going to find this time he's incredibly afraid of what's happening. And at the same time, a young man who's just a shepherd boy has been anointed by the prophet Samuel to be king of Israel. Now, he's not king yet. He has not stepped into that role. Instead, he's still just a boy who watches sheep. Okay? So that's the characters. That's who we're going to see. And we're going to be introduced to the character Goliath in all of this also, who, of course, is a Philistine and the enemy of David and the Israelites. So let's get into it. 17 verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Socoh, which belonged to Judah, and encamped between Socoh and Azekah, in Ephes Damim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He was 9 feet 9 inches tall. Okay, that's the translation for that. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels. That's over 125 pounds. And he had a bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And his shield bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. We'll stop right there for right now. We see in this story that the nation comes out, and what they would typically do is they would draw up battle lines, and they had a valley in between. That way, no one seemed to have the high ground or low ground, but they would meet in the middle to fight. And they would typically go out there and yell at each other. They would yell back and forth, try to intimidate each other, try to get the other group to leave. And it usually didn't work, and they would end up fighting. Well, this time Goliath comes walking out, a mountain of a man, 9 feet, 9 inches tall. He's huge. He's a monster, right? And he stands out there, and he says, "Give me someone that I can fight." Send someone out here. There's no need for all of us to die. Send one man out here and let's fight. Now, the Israelites are terrified, right? I mean, they are scared to death of this guy. They know that if they go out there and fight, that they're not good enough, right? I mean, if I'm standing in line and I'm looking at this guy and I'm like, "Oh, I don't think so," I mean, Israel at this time, there's a chance they didn't even have armor. They weren't as far advanced as the Philistines were. They didn't have all of these things. A few of them did, but not the everyday man. And as they stand out there, to me, what would have been the more logical term is say, "Yeah, we'll send someone out there. Let Goliath walk out about halfway, and then the entire army just rush him," right? I mean, if one's going to die by him, that's fine, but we can get him if it's a group. But they didn't do that. Instead, everyone stands there afraid, facing this giant. And so the question that I'm going to raise to you, and we're going to talk a little bit about, is what are your giants? What's your giant? Now, for most of you, you don't have to really think too hard about what that is. In fact, when I said that, some of you mean, yeah, I know what that giant is. It could be your boss at work. Sometimes, if we're honest, right? It could be your relationship with your spouse. You don't feel like it's what it needs to be. It's something that you've got to address. Something. It could be rebellious kids. Okay? Those short little buggers that run around. They're giants in their own right. Trust me, I know. And we've got these giants in our life. Again, I talked about what is it we're afraid of? What is it that when you go to bed at night is screaming at you, "Come and fight"? Like really? What is it that is yelling out at you? What is it that you're sitting there going, "I can't win this"? What's your giant? What's your giant? For some of you, it might be that God has called you to do something that you don't want to do. some of you, it's just living a godly life. For some of you, it's battling addiction. For some of you, it's believing that you actually have worth. We all have giants in our life. But too often, those giants stand there yelling at us, and nothing ever happens. So, once you identify what your giant is, what is that thing that's standing in front of you, intimidating you, calling you to battle, but you're afraid to do it. Once you realize what that is, you then have to ask yourself the next question. Why don't we fight our giants? Why not? Why is it the nation of Israel drew up for battle, looked out and saw Goliath on the other side, saw that somebody was going to have to fight him? Because if nobody went out and fight him, the Philistines would win. Just by default. Okay? If you're not willing to fight your giant won. You lost. So why don't we fight our giants? I want to look at a couple of different reasons. And we see them in this story, why we don't fight our giants. The first one is obvious. Giants always seem impossible to beat. Goliath's 9 foot 9 inches tall. His coat of mail over him weighs 125 pounds. Okay, chances are David didn't weigh that much. Okay? Think about it. There's some guys in the battlefield who are like, his armor is heavier than me. How in the world am I supposed to kill that? Right? Giants always seem impossible to defeat. Always. When you look at them, you're immediately afraid and you believe you're powerless. Whether it's sin or your relationship. If it's your relationship with your husband or wife, and you're sitting here going, I will never have a healthy relationship with them. Our relationship will never be what it should be because there's just no way I can be enough for it. Or there's no way they can be enough for it. Or there's no way that I can be happy. We get in our minds that our giants are impossible to defeat. They're impossible to defeat. You see every single reason that you'll fail. You see the weapons, you see the armor. You look at your giant and know there's no way. That's just one reason. Next one happens a lot. I'm too busy. It'll take too much time and energy. For the Israelites on that day, it was, I can't afford to go out there and potentially get killed. I got too much to do. I can't go out there and potentially get hurt. Even if I win by some happen chance, I might lose a limb. I might get messed up. I might be laid up. I got too much to do. I got, sheep back home. I got the farm. I got this. I got that. It would take too much. We're going to pick up the story back again at verse 12 in 1 Samuel 17. Now David, he's the hero of the story, was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah named Jesse, who had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the man was already old and advanced in years. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to the battle. And the names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab the firstborn, the next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening. And Jesse said to David his son, take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. Also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. See if your brothers are well, and bring some token from them. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. And David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper, and took the provisions, and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage, and ran to the ranks, and went and greeted his brothers. And as he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines, and spoke the same words as before, and David heard him. Think about this. How would this story have changed if David said, I'm too busy to go out there? He was in charge of the sheep. He had stuff to do. Okay, a lot of times we've all got responsibilities in life. We've got things. We've got jobs. We've got our kids. We've got our families. We got this. We got that. And we sit there and we look at what is standing before us that requires us to go and to fight. And we look at all these other things and we say, I'm too busy. I can't do it. I don't have time. I don't have energy. I can't go out there and do this. And David was in that same position. David had to find someone else to take care of the sheep. He had to trust what he had been entrusted to someone else, and then go out there before he could ever even hear the enemy. If you want to face your giant, you're going to have to be willing to give it some time. If you sit here and say, I don't have time to face my giants, your giants will always win. Always. Always win. And we can see that just by the fact that the army stood out there for 40 days hearing this man shout out to him twice a day. You will actually waste more time avoiding your giant than you will if you just step up and fight it. Let's look at the next reason why we won't fight our giants. No one else is fighting giants. No one else is doing it. No one else is tackling this. No one else is taking a stand here. No one else is saying that. No one else is going and doing it. No one else is fighting for their marriage. I mean, everyone else is just getting divorces. No one else is making sure their kids are coming up right. They're just letting them be. No one else is fighting their addiction. No one else is doing it. We don't see the giants other people have, and so we sit there and we say, no one else is doing it. It must only be me. No one else is fighting their giants. Let's look just a little bit more at Scripture and what's going on. Verses 24 through 27. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. Remember, David is there seeing this. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who's come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel, and the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? The people answered him the same way, so shall it be done to the man who kills him. So you've got the army of Israel who's standing there for 40 days, and King Saul has come out and said, all right, look, here's what I'll do. Whoever's willing to come out and fight the Philistine, I'll let him marry my daughter, which immediately means you'll be part of the royal family. Okay? I'll make you richer than you could imagine, and your entire family will be free. I mean, that's like a lot. right? That's really cool. That'd be awesome. But no one would do it. And David is standing there looking around going, he's reminding everybody, what's Saul going to do for the guy who does this? So they have to consciously say, here's all the things we could have if we would stand. But no one is. The entire army is running away. By the way, that includes King Saul, the leader of the army. So, what happens when everyone else is running away from their giants? Here's the interesting thing. When one person is willing to stand and face a giant, suddenly others are willing to stand also. They've done all this research about, with all of the shootings that have happened in different things. They've actually began to train people. When a shooter comes in somewhere, don't run and hide. Get as many people as possible to throw things, rush him, do whatever you can. And yes, one or two people may die. But when somebody sees that happening, all of a sudden other people are encouraged to do the same. Sometimes it takes one person willing to stand up to their giant before others will do the same. So why shouldn't that person be you? You have the ability to change your family. You have the ability to change your marriage. You first have to decide that you're going to stand and you're going to fight. You have to be willing to do it, even if it means standing alone. Because here's the thing. If your giant wins, you will always live with the guilt of, I didn't do anything. If your marriage falls apart, you will always have the guilt of, I didn't fight hard enough. But if you're the one fighting for that, if you're the one constantly going, if you're the one trying to get them to go to counseling, if you're the one who's going and you're reading marriage books and you're seeking out other people who've been married for a long time and saying, what do I need to do? What can I change? And you're doing all this, and your husband or wife still decides to leave, you're able to sit there and say, I did everything I could. That giant didn't beat me. They let it win. Okay? You have to choose to stand and fight all the time. You have to stand and fight. See, the truth of the matter is the vast majority of people refuse to fight. It's too hard and they're too lazy. This is why marriages fail. This is why children feel neglected, and this is why little girls grow up with daddy issues. Think about it. Because we're not willing to fight. We don't see anyone else fighting, so why should we? The next one. You don't want to get involved. Let's read verses 28 through 30. Suddenly David comes in contact with his oldest brother. It says, now Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, why have you come down, and whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil in your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David said, what have I done now? Was it not but a word? And he turned away from him towards another and spoke in the same way. And the people answered him again as before. Here's the truth. People don't want you to face your giant. They don't. People don't want you to stand up for what's right. Because then it shows that they should also. I was reminded of a story that a guy by the name of Tom Rainer told. When he was young and growing up, he had a friend, and one day his friend, this little girl, came running over to him, and her face was all beaten and bloodied and just a mess. And she had got out of the car, and her dad got out of the car right after her. And her dad said, "You see what her mom did?" And this little girl ran up and gave him a hug, and while she was hugging him, she said, "It wasn't my mom. He's going to kill me when we get home." And then she got back in the car with her dad, and they drove home. Now, this guy, Tom, he immediately freaked out, as any kid would, called his dad, who was just a couple of miles away, and his dad said, "I'm coming to get you right now. We're going to go over there." And they called the sheriff because they knew what was going to happen. They knew in reality she would be dead. And as they went out there, the dad was, some of the neighbors knew something was going on, and they were standing outside of the house, and the dad was getting ready to barge in there to protect this little girl. And he looked at one of the other neighbors, one of the men, and said, "You need to come with me." And the guy looked at him and said, "I don't want to get involved." If your excuse is that you don't want to get involved, that you don't want to stand up for something, forgive me for offending you, but you are a coward. People don't want to get involved because it will make life uncomfortable. What happens if all of a sudden my giant is a member of my family that I've got to stand up to? What if it's my father who treats my children bad? What if it's my father-in-law or my mother-in-law who's doing something that's wrong and is affecting my children? I can't say anything because it'll rip the family apart. Don't be a coward. Or maybe you'll say, "You know what, if I stand up to my wife and tell her, no, what you're doing is wrong. What you're doing is tearing us apart. We have to fight for our marriage. We have to fight for our children." If you're saying, "If I do that, then life at home will get very uncomfortable," stop being a coward. Stand and fight. Stand for something. Do what you know is right. We've got an entire society who has said, "I'm not willing to fight. I don't want to get involved. It's too messy, it's too hard, and life will be too uncomfortable if I take a stand against this thing," whatever it is. I don't want to experience that. I may lose friends. I may make enemies. My family could be fractured. Life could become very uncomfortable. I could lose a business partner. I could lose my business if I'm not willing to do this or that. If I'm not willing to stand for what's right, life could get very, very difficult. I don't want to get involved, is the cry of cowards. By the way, if you see someone who's abusing a child or abusing their spouse and you don't step in, you are as guilty as the next person. One of the things I love about my dad is the type that will stand in the gap for someone. And he taught me and my brother to do the same thing. My dad would go to a Dairy Queen, or did go to a Dairy Queen, and saw this guy who was pushing around his girlfriend and doing this, had her pushed up against the wall. And my dad just walked right over there to him and said, "Yeah, I think it's time for you to leave." The guy tried getting all up in it. My dad's, if you've met my dad, he's not a tiny guy, but he'd step in the way. In the same way he taught me and my brother. In fact, when I almost got in a fight in school, I never got in a fist fight in school. I think it was because everyone was scared of my little brother, who's a lot bigger than I am. And I remember one day this guy was getting in my face, And I was ready, hey, I'll take it on. And all of a sudden, my little brother, dadgum, comes and steps right in the middle and just starts bad-mouthing this kid and gets the kid backed up against the wall and makes him feel so small. Because my brother was leg pressing 1,000 pounds at the time. He's big. You stand up for your family. You stand up for the ones who can't stand for themselves. Be willing to get involved. Allow your life to get messy in that sense. Now, with that, when you're getting involved, let me just say this. Make sure you're on the right side. Make sure you're on the right side. You don't want to be the one backing up a bully. Okay? Make sure you're on the right side. Let's move on. You will be a slave to your giant until you are willing to fight. This is so true. You'll never move beyond your giants. The nation of Israel stood there for 40 days and listened to a guy challenge them. And because they weren't willing to do anything, they weren't willing to try anything, they weren't willing to fight, they were stuck there. If you're not willing to fight for your marriage will never thrive. You'll never find peace and prosperity. And if you're never willing to stand and fight, your children will never know the strength that they could have. Here's one of the things I've learned because of my kids. They think I'm the strongest guy in the world. Right? They jump to daddy and have no fear. They have no fear that I'll catch them and protect them. They're not worried about it at all. And if they see me not willing to fight for something, you know what? Their marriages, when they get bigger, they will base off of the marriage that Kathy and I have. The way we raise our kids is how they'll raise theirs. The way I stand and fight for my family and for the things that I know are important is the way they will stand and fight also. That includes if I run away. There's a reason why children from divorced families are more at risk to have a divorce. There's a reason why children from alcoholic fathers and mothers are more at risk to be alcoholic. It's because they watch the strongest people in their life. Think about it. Not only will you be a slave to your giant, your family will also. Here's the challenge for you. Choose this day to be the day that you stand and fight. Make a choice. Stand up. Do it. Say, this is the day. I don't know where to start. This is the day. I'm going to stand. I'm going to fight. I'm not going to allow the giants in my life to rule me. Be willing to stand. Be willing to fight. I want to read 2 more verses. See, when people begin to see that you're willing to face your giants, when they begin to see it, they'll put you in contact with the right people. Verses 31 and 32. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul the king. And he sent for him. And David said to Saul, remember, this is the youngest child whose older brothers are there and running away. This is what he says. Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine. We would not have the story of David and Goliath if David never made a choice. You want to know how you defeat your giants? You start by making a choice. I'm going to fight for this as long as I have to. I'm going to fight for my marriage. I'm going to fight for my children. I'm going to fight for what's right. And I'm not talking about physical fighting, okay? Though at times you may have to step in. But I'm not talking about a physical fight. Scripture tells us very clearly we do not battle against flesh and blood. The war that we fight should first be fought on our knees as we pray. See, here's the thing about David. Everyone else was scared. Everyone else was fearful. No one else was willing to stand and fight. The primary difference, and we're going to get into this here in the next couple of weeks, the primary difference between David and every other person, including the king, was that David knew he was not the only one fighting. The God of heaven and earth stood beside him. David knew that because he was fighting the right thing, he was not fighting alone. And it would not be his own strength. It would not be his own power. It would not be his own skill that would win. It would be the power of God using him. But first, David had to say, I will fight the Philistine.